ladies' Bible study on the 22nd, Tuesday mornings still. October 30th is shoe box packing evening with OCC. I know we had some folks this morning said they were going to come just for that. November 7th is We Care Pregnancy Center fundraising banquet. It's a girl. Let me say this about that. This is really a woman's function. Yes. Well, it says Kayla and Alex, but yeah, well, yeah. But it is a woman's function. Okay, so guys, I think I said because I had heard this morning that I was going to come and eat snacks. I think they were afraid I was going to come. They spoiled the party, so they came up to me right after church and said, "We want you to know that the baby shower is a woman's function."
Wow, called out, huh?
That's all right. That's all right. We'll have our own shower. Donations needed for the Christmas store for Awana. We'd like to give for that for the kids so they can buy stuff for their parents and siblings. And that's it. That was short. Any other announcements? Prayer requests? Anybody?
We're in Popular traveling tomorrow to pick up.
And Popular is coming to get their 500 bags of candy tomorrow. And if you,
Betsy, you're traveling.
that's right, Marcia and Betsy.
Will and Patty are going to be
Will and
traveling.
Patty are leaving. Marsh?
Judy Johnson, they think she's had a stroke now. She's in the hospital, and their MRI machine was broke down, so they're waiting to find out.
Can you reach out in here?
Judy Johnson. They think she's had a stroke, but the MRI machine is broken down. I don't know. Where's she at? Betsy's and Marcia's witness as they're on their trip. Renee?
For Diane Kurtzel, she and her family, she's battling breast cancer.
Okay, many of you know Diane. She's been a big supporter of the pregnancy center, behind the scenes kind of thing. Others? Diane?
Prayers that I go see the eye doctor again tomorrow. Probably another shot, and then the other specialist thinks that I've got glaucoma starting, and they might let me get the shot in.
For Diane and her eye condition. Others? Anybody?
Unsafe family members.
Unsafe family member?
Big one.
Amen.
It's frustrating waiting on the Lord. It's hard not try to make things happen.
Yeah.
Amen. Others?
It almost sounds like you need prayer, are you not feeling well?
He does.
I'm not feeling well.
Cough all night long.
All night long. All I do is cough until I fall unconscious. Coughing. I'm so tired I can't do anything else. I just go to sleep finally.
Do you have it?
Sounds like us.
No.
You don't want to do it.
No, he doesn't want to go for that, that's why do that. Yeah, why would he want to do that?
All right. Any other prayer requests? Yes.
My mom says, please feel better.
Okay. All right. I agree with that. Anybody else? Stand. So Ronnie, lead us in our opening prayer, please.
Father, we thank you for this evening. Thank you that we can be in your house, worshiping you, and just for that freedom and privilege, Lord. We thank you for the God you are, and that we can turn all our prayer requests over to you, Lord, for the guidance you give us. Lord, we
179th lesson in the book of Acts. Why did the city slicker hunters quit hunting elephants? Because they got tired of carrying the decoys.
That's my father-in-law.
You're blessed.
Feel for it.
He needs a new joke book. I thought I didn't know one here, maybe. What do you get when you cross elephants with fish? Swimming trunks. Thank you, Brother All right, last week we began a new section of Scripture, looking at the riot at Ephesus. And we have concluded that whenever the word prevails, Satan will be aggressively set against that world, or that word. Here in Ephesus, we find, beginning in verse 21, that the people are angry because their opportunity for material gain is being hampered. Christianity was affecting their business. That's kind of exciting to see. Christianity is creating an economic problem for them, and you know that's nothing new, really. Christianity and economics have mixed it up a lot throughout history, if you think about it, and we'll see that as we go through here. Remember back when we looked at Simon earlier in Acts, how he mixed Christianity and economics. What did he want to buy? He wanted to buy the Holy Spirit, okay, for his own gain. Okay, remember the medium girl in Acts 16? Paul cast a demon out of her, and her owners got very upset. Why? Well, they were making a living off of that girl's ability, that demon's ability to foretell the future. So again, Christianity upsetting people's economics. And sometimes Christianity should upset economics. There are some ways that people make a living that Christianity should, and your outline word is upset. Christianity sometimes should upset things. But before we get into the actual riot itself, we'll look at the first two verses in this section, verse 21 and 22. Look a little bit about what's going on with Paul. The riot doesn't start until the 23rd verse, or the preparation for the riot, so we have a little bit of peace beforehand. And it says in verse 21, when these things were accomplished, what was accomplished? What had just previously transpired? All right, victory over magic. How's that sound? Victory over magic. They burn these books in the way it's written, in the imperfect tense. They continue to burn these books. People coming, burning their magic books, their spells, all that kind of stuff. And the gospel has become firmly established now in the city of Ephesus. And then it says, Paul purposed in his spirit. See, do you have a big S or a little s in spirit?
Big.
Yeah, I kind of like a little s. If I was the translator of that, I think he could say Paul made up his mind. Okay.
I have a small list.
Do you have a small s? Okay. Well, that must be a really intelligent guy that can translate small s. But Paul purposed in his spirit when he had passed through Macedonia and Achaia to go to Jerusalem, saying, after I've been there, I must also see Rome. Now, Paul was always making plans. He was a master I'm going to go through Macedonia and Achaia, and then I'm going to go to Jerusalem, and then after that I have to go see Rome. So he has a plan firmly set in his mind, because he's kind of come, you can see he's kind of come to the persuasion that Ephesus can function on its own. After he's seen all these people burning these magic books and all that kind of stuff, and he's been there for almost 3 full years, and he knows, I think, that they know enough. There are elders there of such quality that they can lead the church and the churches. The Christians have grown up and are becoming mature. The work has matured, and they have established churches throughout Asia Minor. Remember, we mentioned last time that we think at least that the 7 churches mentioned in the book of Revelation could have been founded during this 3-year period of Paul's ministry in Ephesus. So he's done a great work. The whole province has heard of the gospel. There are people established in churches and other places. Everything's going pretty good. It's all in good shape. And so he says to himself, well, now I can go ahead and leave, and I'm going to go to Macedonia and Achaia, and then I'm going to go to Jerusalem. So Macedonia and Achaia are in what direction from where he's at?
A long way to
Well, they're across the Aegean Sea, and in which direction are they? He's in Ephesus, and he wants to go to Macedonia and Achaia. Ephesus would be in present-day Turkey. Macedonia would be northern Greece, and Achaia would be actually the mainland of Greece. So he's talking about going to the west, okay? Back across the Aegean Sea, back to the west. And then he talks about going to Jerusalem, which would be what direction from there? Back to the east. And then he talks about going to Rome, which would be in what direction from there? Back to the west. So he's talking about going to the west, to the east, to the west. What a plan. So you might think, well, why is he going to do that? What's he going to do all that traveling for? Why doesn't he just go one way and just go one way? Why does he want to go to Macedonia and Achaia and then return to Jerusalem? Kind of interesting. Why does he want to go there? Verse 21, Macedonia and Achaia. Go to the west, to the east, back to the west. He's been there. He's established. Hasn't he established churches in Macedonia and Achaia? Yeah, Philippi, Corinth, Thessaloniki, Berea, all over the place. He's established those churches. Well, here's why he wants to do it. He wanted to go to Macedonia and Achaia and then back to Jerusalem, because the church of Jerusalem was very, very, very poor. And Paul wanted to go to his established churches and do what? In your outline, the words are, take up a love offering from those churches that he would then take as a gift to the church at Jerusalem. So he wants to go to Macedonia and Achaia, collect this offering. And it's a pretty exciting reason, really, if you think about it. In several places in 2 Corinthians, Paul alludes to this offering. We'll just look at 1 or 2 here. Chapter 9, verse 1, 2 Corinthians. Now concerning the ministering to the saints, it is superfluous of me to write to you, for I know your willingness, about which I boast of you to the Macedonians, that Achaia was ready a year ago, and your zeal has stirred up the majority. Referring to the mindset of these people, Macedonians, the Achaeans. He talks there, he will continue to speak about their giving, how they didn't give sparingly, so on and so forth. He talks about not giving grudgingly, etc., etc. He makes a note of this particular thing of their giving elsewhere in Corinthians. In the end of the book of Acts, in chapter 15, verses 25 and 26, now I know I'm going to Jerusalem to minister to the saints, okay? For it pleased those from Achaia, or Macedonia and Achaia, to make a certain contribution for the poor among the saints who are in Jerusalem. So that's why he wants to. He wants to go to the west, pick up this money from these churches, and take it back to Jerusalem. And it's important. You know, God has really blessed this church financially. And it's a very, very giving church. And you need to know that we are very giving with your money. That when we see a need in the community, when we see a need in the body, we're ready to step up and help people. And I think it was important for Paul to teach us a lesson here. He was teaching us the lesson of in your outline, the word is the unity of the body. That a group of believers in one place is greatly responsible for a group of believers in another place. And we are all only one body. And I think Paul, secondly, wanted to teach the practicality in regards to lessons of love. That love, listen, sometimes love just gets down to the simplicity of giving your money for the sake of somebody else. Sometimes that's just how practical love can be. It's not, we don't need to make it very difficult. This is a very, very practical lesson of love. Giving, self-sacrificing for others. So Paul did that. We don't know all the details in Acts, but he went to Macedonia, he went to Acacia, he collected the offering. And finally, over in chapter 21, we will see him arrive in Jerusalem. So he did. His plan did come to fruition. The Lord allowed his plan to take place. Back in verse 21, he says, he wants to go to Rome. And you read that, of that yearning in his letter to the Roman church. He was a strategist, and he wanted to reach as far as he could with the gospel. And Paul's plan was this, to plant the gospel. Where was Paul's home church? Antioch. So Paul's plan, if you look at his plan, is from Antioch, almost going directly west, along one of the major thoroughfares of the Roman Empire. Paul wanted to go through all the large provincial cities and plant churches from the east to the west, all the way to Rome, which had a church, but he still wanted to minister to that church, and eventually even further west than that. And if you follow his ministry, you find all these key points along this roadway that was used for commerce, and Paul was using the same roadway for the spread of the gospel of Jesus Christ. And he's planting all these churches in these key provincial centers, and then from these provincial centers, the gospel goes out into the countryside. Very, very, not a difficult plan, very simplistic plan, but a very effective plan. If Paul could get a church planted in the capital of a province, he felt he had a running start on winning that province to the Lord. And now he wants to go one step further to Rome. And incidentally, that wasn't the end of his desires, as you'll see in a minute. And after he had planted the church in Ephesus, he realized that the line of witness should then begin to spread from Ephesus. And so Paul would go to the city. In your outline, the word is Rome. Plant a witness there. There's already a church there, but perhaps he felt he could enhance that witness. And then the word would be spread even further. And then as all these centers of each province began to flourish in the Lord, the word would spread. And there would be actually, like, if these centers exploded with the word, there would be almost like a cross-pollination. And then the whole area of Asia Minor, Europe, would be saturated with the gospel of Jesus Christ. Because remember, Paul was an advocate in the process of evangelism gets to Rome, that was only a step for him to go somewhere else. And where else did he want to go? Romans 15:24. Paul wanted to go all the way to Spain. It says in the authorized, it's not in the best manuscripts, but it says in the authorized version, I will come to you, for I trust to see you in my journey. In other words, he writes the Romans and he says, I'm going to come and stop off on my, he talks about a journey, I'm going to come and stop off on my way to Spain. Your outline, the word is Spain. You might say, well, why do we want to go to Spain? Why do people climb mountains? It's there. People, Paul just thought everybody needed to hear about the Lord. And Spain was a great place. The Romans had conquered Spain. And there were many great men of mind in Spain. Most notably Seneca was there. I think Paul wanted to try to win him for the Lord because he was probably the most influential philosophical mind in the Roman Empire. Paul would see conquering Spain as being fantastic. Just another line from Rome. He could go all the way down to Jerusalem, Antioch. He could go all the way over to, I mean, you think about it, it's a large area. It's really a large area that he was attempting to win to the Lord. So he was a very strategic planner in his conquest. He writes in Romans 1:13, he says, now I do not want you to be unaware, brethren, that I often planned to come to you. He's saying, I've often wanted to come to you guys in Rome, but I was hindered until now, that I might have, he says, some fruit among you. I think that might be spiritual fruit. That I might have some fruit among you, just as among the other Gentiles. I am a debtor both to Greeks and to barbarians, both to wise and to unwise. So as much for me, I am ready to preach the gospel to you who are in Rome also. So he wants to go to Rome. He's taking care of the needs of the saints in Jerusalem. And there's kind of a break here, if you want to keep it in your mind as you study, as we continue in the study in the book of Acts. There's kind of a break here, because from here on out, Paul will become very, very fixated on getting to Rome. It really begins to be almost a burden for him to get there. And he does get there, but he doesn't get there in the way he thought he would get there. But that's what happens when you work for the Lord. But he does get there, and from here on out, he will set his sights on Rome, and he's going to get there, but it's going to be a pretty exciting trip getting there. And that's what we'll be building up to now as we continue our study. So verse 22, he sent two into Macedonia ahead of him. These are his advanced men, if you will. He's going to go to Macedonia, so he sends two. Who are they? Timothy and Erastus. You know who Timothy is? He had been in Corinth. He had come back to Ephesus. Now Paul sends him ahead, kind of till the field maybe. Let him know he's coming, pave the way for things that he might need when he gets there. And Erastus, we don't really know who he is. Maybe he's the same gentleman that's mentioned in Romans 16:23. Maybe. Erastus is a very common name in that part of the world. We don't know for sure. But Paul stays in Ephesus a little while longer. So he sends these two guys in front of him to begin the process of preparing, I imagine, for the collection of a love offering. And why does he stay? Well, if you look at 1 Corinthians 16:8, it says, I will tarry in Ephesus until Pentecost. You think, well, why is he going to stay until Pentecost? Verse 9, for a great and effective door has opened to me, and there are many adversaries. And if Timothy comes, see that he may be with you without fear. So he's writing to Corinth, and he's says from Ephesus, I'm going to send Timothy. You receive him. I'm staying because there has been a door opened unto me, and there are many adversaries. So he wasn't done. I think he kind of thought he was done, and then he wasn't done. He realized God had some more for him to do. So he had a great door, and he had many adversaries, and we're going to see now in verse 23 that here come the adversaries. As we see this, the prelude to the riot. And we're going to look at this in these three different categories, if you will. We're going to look at the causes of the riot. We're going to look at the characteristics of the riot. And then we're going to look at the calming of the riot. In your outline, the words are causes, characteristics, and the calming. Okay? Now let's just say this right up front. I've already said it really. The real cause of the riot was Satan's antagonism to the word prevailing. Remember verse 20? So that truth kind of pervades everything here. For the word grew and the word prevailed. Okay? So Satan gets uptight and he has this riot start. And that's the real behind-the-scenes reason for this riot. But as we look at these verses, we're going to be looking at other reasons, other causes, other characteristics, etc., that bring this thing to pass. And look at verse 23. Here we start with the first section, the causes of the riot. And about that time, it says, this is Paul, now who has stayed on in Ephesus. About that time, okay, there arose a great commotion about the way. And we've looked at the way. What is the way? That's the term for Christians, Christianity. Jesus said, I am the way. All throughout Scripture, there's only one way. So there's a commotion about the way. So here, there is no small, and your outline of the word is uproar over Christianity. They have become uptight about the Christian message. And things have been moving along very well for Christianity. Paul's been preaching. People have been getting converted. The church is growing. The whole area of Asia Minor has been dominated by the gospel of Christ. It's kind of like, if you look, remember back in early in the book of Acts, the leaders come to Peter and John and they say, you have filled Jerusalem with your doctrine. They hated that. The Sanhedrin leadership came to Peter and John. You filled the city, you filled Jerusalem with your doctrine. And remember, they called them before the Sanhedrin, and they said, you can't talk anymore about the resurrection and this Jesus Christ God. And what did Peter tell them? I can obey man, or I can obey God. And I'm going to obey God. Okay? And so back then, the persecution began. Here we see this persecution. And they have filled Asia Minor with their doctrine, sweeping across the countryside. God is doing exciting things, and thus people are starting to get upset. Satan begins stirring up the evilness in men's hearts. He starts working to harden their hearts. And it's exciting to see that that's what the gospel, I really believe that's what the gospel should always do. The church of Jesus Christ should always create, in your outline the word is stir, S-T-I-R. We should always be stirring things up. Because what's the world like? It's the world full of evilness. We should be stirring it up. And whenever I hear there's some flack going around about a church somewhere that's causing a stir, I stir is being caused by the preaching of the word, I get excited about it, because we should see that in our communities. We should be a point of agitation in our communities in regards to the calling of people to godliness. So this riot, incidentally, as a side note, if you've ever studied sociology or mob psychology, you're going to see some great insights into how that all works, how people get easily influenced in a mob-type environment. We're going to, in that we will gain some insight into how Satan operates. But the basic cause then of the riot was Christianity's tremendous spread and mighty use of the Word of God. But let's look at some more specific causes, if you will. So in verse 24, we meet a man named Demetrius. Demetrius. My head meat cutter in Athens, Greece, was named Demetrius. And that's a very, very common name in Greek. So there's a certain man named Demetrius. This man is a silversmith who made silver shrines of Artemis, or Diana, if you will. The Greek is Artemis. And these shrines, it says, brought no small profit to the craftsmen. So we meet Demetrius, and he's probably a big wig in the guild of silversmiths. Are you familiar with guilds? Guilds are today, what would we equate to a guild today?
Union.
Union. Yeah. The guild movement is very old, and it was started in Europe. Artisans kind of band together, and with a desire of gaining greater influence and making more money. And that's what happened in those times. So all of these people then, they would band together for a common profit. Maybe Demetrius was the head of their association or whatever it may have been. Maybe he was just a leader by his very nature. But nevertheless, he kind of steps out into the forefront here. He was a guy who evidently ran this shrine and business. Maybe he contracted out to all the silversmiths to make shrines, and he sold them. He bought them at a reduced price, and then he would sell them for greater profit. I don't know. But it seems to be a big business, and it would be in that city. It would be a very big business. There is the same name. Demetrius is also mentioned in 3 John 12. And I don't know if it's the same person. If it is the same person, the Demetrius mentioned in 3 John 12 would be saved. So if it is the same person, he would have eventually been converted. It's possible, not denying that. But this is a fairly common trade. Many of the archaeological discoveries around Ephesus, there's evidence of a silversmith trade. The only thing is you can't find any silver shrines. The only ones you can find are made of terracotta, clay, earthen type things. Why can't you find any silver shrines? Because Ephesus was conquered by one side, and the other side, and the other side, and every time they got conquered, what happened? They took everything that was worth anything and took it home with them. So they would have taken any silver they could have found, would have melted it down probably, and traveled it off. But there was some type of a craftsman guild that made shrines. It was probably very wealthy, and the reason why it would have been wealthy is because of the Temple of Diana. The Temple of Diana was a monstrous place, 420 feet long, almost a football field and a half, 250 feet wide, 127 columns, 60 feet high. The ceiling was 60 feet high. Can you imagine building that? And every piece of it. This temple think the original temple was financed by the king of Lydia. This temple was the most impressive temple in that part of the world. It was more impressive than the temples in Rome and in Athens. All made out of marble. Hundreds of thousands of people would come there at certain times of the year. And the people, the priests and priestesses preached. They had different preaching sessions. They would have a session for all the eunuchs. They would have sessions for temple worshipers. They would have a special area for priestesses. They would have a special area for prostitutes, criminals, all indulging in worship that was centered around orgies. And this place was a treasure trove of gold and silver. Money flowed everywhere, and it was very, very wealthy and very, very famous. And there were certain times of the year, like I said, that literally hundreds of thousands of people came there. And 127 pillars, and every one of those pillars was donated by somebody that didn't live in Ephesus, by kings and countries from all around the world. And they all had their names inscribed on the pillars of the temple. So it's a very, very famous place. And periodically, like I said, during the year, all these pilgrims, like you see from the Hajj, when the Muslims go to Saudi Arabia, you would have this huge pilgrimage, and there would be a great influx of people into the city. And so it was during that time that the tourist traffic was the greatest in the worship of Artemis. Was a really big business at that time. And these silversmiths that Demetrius represents sell these little shrines to the tourist, if you will, to people making pilgrimages to the city to worship at the shrine of Artemis. And as best as we can tell, these are like little miniature temples or little miniature statues of Artemis. It's kind of interesting. If you go back anywhere in the history of mankind, people have always made household, in your outline the word is gods, idols. All sorts of Old Testament passages, up until the day of Paul, all these various miniature gods being worshipped, put them in their houses. And what do they do today? They stick them on their dashboard. They hang them from their mirrors. They're saints. What are those? Those are idols. Yeah, they are. Mankind hasn't changed much. People still do that. You see people. St. Christopher. People with the need to call on these other gods. Happened during the New Testament, happened during the Old Testament. And so for these silversmiths, this is a big business because Ephesus, in the month of May, every year, in the city of Ephesus, they had the Artesian Games. Artesian Games that were dedicated to Artemis, okay, the god Artemis. And for people from all over the world, it was kind of like an Olympics, all right, the Artesian Games. And some historians believe that it was at this particular time, in the month of May, during the Artesian Games, that this riot takes place. All of these people from all over the world at the city of Ephesus. So all these people are swarming all around the city, and there's getting ready to take place a riot, which will sweep through the city. And all these guys are trying to sell their shrines and all this stuff, all their little silver statues of the goddess Artemis, and people might be wanting to buy them, But there's a problem. There's a problem. And the problem is these Christians. Because these Christians are messing up business. Verse 25. So Artemis called together all these people who are making money off the shrines. Okay, verse 25. He called them together with the workers of similar occupation. He said, men, you know that we have our prosperity by this trade. He's saying, hey guys, we make our living off of making these little shrines. As I said, probably during this big month, best business of the year in the month of May. People, just the city full of worshipers, and all these Christians are running around talking about Jesus Christ. So what had happened to these silversmiths, they had begun to feel the gospel had hit them in the money bag. The gospel of Jesus was following up their business because people were accepting the truth of Christ, and what were they doing in regards to their idols? They were turning away from them. And that was bad for, and the word in your outline is business. It was bad for business. Wouldn't it be exciting if New Life Family Worship Center had an effect like that on our community?
Amen.
If we could make it so hard for the drug sellers to sell their drugs because of the Christian witness in the community, if we make it so hard for the bars to prosper, wouldn't that be exciting?
Abortionists had no business.
Amen. Yeah, amen. Abortionists with no business. Amen. Well, that's really what's happening here. You know, the city is being influenced by the Christians. And it's becoming an economic problem because Christianity has spread to such a great degree that it has gained power in the city of Ephesus and all the areas surrounding that city. Amen.
Amen.
Amen. Questions or comments? Yeah.
Back in the day, not that I was living then, to be clear.
Back in the
Back
day,
in the day of Cecil B.
DeMille.
DeMille movies, I knew nothing about it, I only read it. There was a great movie, and I, for the life of me, can't remember the actor that played it, but he was a very handsome guy with deep black hair, and he played the